Good morning, conference. It's lovely to see you all here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed after I'm sure it was another night in the bar. We welcome to F27, Connecting Communities, Building a Transport Network for the 21st Century, which you'll find on page 68 of the agenda. There are 3 amendments, just so you're aware. I'll obviously be taking those in turn at the end. Those can be found in Conference Daily and Conference Extra. Can I now ask Catherine Macy to please stand by to propose Amendment 1 and call Vera Hobhouse MP to propose the motion.
Good morning, conference. I am delighted to be bringing forward this motion on transport. Net zero is not negotiable. At our last big conference in 2019, we agreed on our detailed plan to get to net zero and to cut most emissions by 2030. We were clear that we must focus on those sectors with the highest carbon emissions and those where it is clear what we have to do. Transport is the biggest contributor to carbon emissions in the UK. To get to net zero, we must concentrate on A, making motorized vehicles green, and B, providing genuine alternatives to traveling by car. We must make trains and buses better, and we must improve choices to cycle and walk. Years of Conservative government have made public transport far less easy, much more expensive, and progress towards net zero has been pitiful. Just 101 miles of track is due to be electrified this year, when we need to achieve a target of thousands of miles. Conference, we are calling for a proper rail electrification program. It is completely unforgivable that we are building a new railway line in Bedfordshire that isn't electrified from day one. Madness. In a few years' time, the line will have to be upgraded at significant cost and huge disruption to passengers. Staggering incompetence and a complete absence of direction from this Conservative government. It is vital that we increase our rail network. HS2 is now at serious risk to be delivered at all. It faces death by 1,000 cuts. By cancelling the next stage of HS2, we will be left with a line that goes from Birmingham to the outskirts of London, missing out on the biggest benefits of connectivity between the north and the south and across the north. Our motion calls for HS2 to be delivered in full alongside Northern Powerhouse Rail. I welcome the amendment on making train stations more accessible. We must never forget our more vulnerable citizens and make public transport fully inclusive. This is why we are so appalled by the proposals to close ticket offices. Up and down the country, we Liberal Democrats are leading the campaign to keep our ticket offices open. The Conservative government is not only incompetent, it is cruel too. We need radical change. The Williams report commissioned by the government recommended that a new guiding mind should take the lead, the new Great British Railways. For a while, the Conservatives were keen on the idea, but now they have lost interest. GBR has an office, but no powers. Legislation to establish Great British Rail has been delayed. Will it be in the King's Speech? Our motion calls for Great British Railways to be given the powers it needs so that we establish the guiding mind which will put passengers first. It includes to fix our fare system. Many of you who have travelled to Bournemouth by train will have been bamboozled by the options available. Why, for example, is a split ticket, 2 tickets for the same journey, cheaper? But before putting the fare system right, fare prices must be frozen, rather than tinkering around the edges. I'm happy to accept an amendment on giving more powers to local authorities to cut fares where possible. Let's now turn to buses. Bus fares have risen by 89% since 2005, and services are declining at an alarming rate. The £2 cap on bus fares is a welcome change, but a cap on fares is no good if there's no services at all. This month, Manchester is taking back control of its bus network. London has never lost it. This motion calls for all local authorities to be given the powers to franchise their bus network and to remove the ban on local authorities running their own bus companies. Yeah, I think this deserves a clap. And we must get people used to public transport when they're young. That's why we are calling to extending half fares to everyone in full-time education. We want to create a young person's bus card for 19 to 25-year-olds to give them a third off bus fares like they already have for the trains. But without investment, we won't get any of this. The Conservatives have pledged to spend £24 billion on road building without any equivalent for the railways or for buses. We Liberal Democrats would redirect some of that money from road building into public transport spending. We would reverse the government's cut to the active travel budget and promote walking and cycling for shorter journeys. Conference. We need a transport revolution towards public transport and active travel. We must fix our broken bus and rail services, improve connectivity, cut emissions, reduce congestion, tackle air pollution, and improve our lives. What's not to support in this motion? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera. Can I now ask Councillor Amanda Taylor to please stand by to propose Amendment 2, and I call Catherine Macy to propose Amendment 1.
Travelling as a disabled person is never fun. I know not all of you are London-based, but when I travel down to York to get to HQ or Westminster, I have to navigate Green Park Station. In Green Park Station, I have the choice between less walking but some stairs, or a lot of walking and a lift. Even when we have lifts and ramps, it's sometimes not always an easy choice. We need to improve our transport system for disabled people. To truly make disabled people a part of our society, we have to allow people like me and LDDA to leave their house and get to work, get to social engagements, get to party conference. This amendment is something that is a really simple thing, but a lot of people have sort of gone, oh, but retrofitting is so expensive. Only 13 out of 41 Elizabeth Line stations are accessible from train to street. 13. And this was something that was finished last year in 2022. Why are disabled people being left out time and time again of policy and motions? If you want to get us into work, you have to help us to get to work. If you want to involve us in society, we have to be able to go out and travel. Disabled people are significantly less likely to be able to drive. They're significantly less likely to be in a house where a car is owned. We have to do better, and we have to ensure that the core basics are there. And this is before even acknowledging ensuring that things like signposting to allow the choices at places like Green Park Station are there. I'm really also excited to see the amendment on ticket officers. For those of you in England where it is an issue, as I know it's devolved, we have a sign on the LDDL stand, so come and show your support in your local area by taking a photo with it. But to conclude, please pass this amendment, and please remember, disability issues are not just health, and they're not just benefits. We need to be at every part of society because right now too many of us are stuck at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Can I now ask Councillor Lisa Smart to please stand by, and I call Councillor Amanda Taylor to propose Amendment 2.
Good morning, Conference. I'm very pleased to support this motion, and I'm here to move the amendment to abandon government-mandated proposals to close ticket offices in our railway stations. I believe the closures of the ticket offices will cause great harm, will reduce services to passengers, it will harm railway staff by putting thousands of them out of work, and it will make our stations less safe places to be. Ticket offices are widely used. 1 in 8 journeys is on a ticket bought at a railway station ticket office. And that's 180 million journeys a year. Maybe you're like me. Maybe sometimes you use the ticket machine, sometimes you buy online. But there are times when you need the help of a human being to buy your ticket and plan your journey. So get the best ticket for you, not the one that the machines want you to have or the algorithm of the internet. When you have a complicated journey and you need to make sure it all works out with the connections, what to do when things go wrong. And we all know they do sometimes go wrong on a train journey. And for some people, ticket offices are the only way to get a ticket. People who speak other languages, older people, people with disabilities who perhaps cannot use the ticket offices or can't use the internet. And of course, disabled people are more likely to need travel assistance on their journeys and rely on the services of the railway staff. Hugh Merriman from the Department of Transport has said, modernising the passenger experience by moving staff out of ticket offices will make them more visible and accessible. How can somebody be more visible than somebody sitting under a great big sign saying tickets? And I wonder how somebody in a wheelchair is expected to track down a roving member of staff on the platform. And if you're a visually impaired person, how do you know when you found that member of staff and that they really are a member of staff who's going to help you? As the previous speaker said, it's the people with disabilities who are most in need of using public transport. And taking away these ticket offices compromises their freedom and their independence, and it is discriminatory. There is a risk that not having station staff will actually mean, not having ticket office staff will actually mean that we have no station staff at all at some stations. And staff do keep our stations safe. The stations have a lovely romantic image, but perhaps if you're a woman on your own at a station late at night when your train's been cancelled, you can feel vulnerable, and unstaffed stations will increase that risk to lone travellers, not just women, but also other minority groups. Well, there has been an outcry to these proposals. 750,000 people responded to the consultation, even though initially it was just for 21 days. 1,000 people marched on Downing Street in August, amongst them many representatives of disability groups. Hundreds and thousands of people all up and down the country have signed Liberal Democrat petitions to save the ticket offices. I ask you to support the amendment to keep our ticket offices, keep our station staff, and keep our stations safe for everybody. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much. Can I now please ask Andrew Haldane to please stand by, and I call Councillor Lisa Smart to propose Amendment 3.
Morning, Conference. This amendment, it's about power, and it's specifically about the power to innovate. This motion, which I'm very happy to support, rightly calls for more power to be given to local authorities and local communities. But I think we should go further. We've got a real patchwork of devolution across our country at the moment. There are different powers in West Yorkshire than in the Tees Valley, different powers in Lancashire than in Greater Manchester. where I am. And Vera, in moving the motion, rightly talked about the brand new bright yellow buses that we're starting to see across Greater Manchester. And I, as a Liberal Democrat being quite fond of yellow, was delighted that that was the answer to the question of how do you unite a city that is quite often divided half blue, if they're a City supporter, and half red, if you're a United supporter. The answer, as so often for many of us in this room, is go with the yellow team. There are concerns about the future funding model, though, of the bus franchising, the re-regulation of the buses. There's an assumption that passenger numbers are going to increase by 30% by 2030, and that's baked into all the financial calculations, so we all need to keep an eye on that. We as Liberal Democrats support that re-regulation, but we need to keep an eye on the numbers. And as Liberal Democrats, we believe that the best place for decisions to be taken is absolutely as close as possible to the people that those decisions affect. And much of our country does not currently have that power. We've made progress with devolution, moving some decisions closer to the people they affect, but we remain far too centralised a country. Now, I'm moving Amendment 3, which talks about power and it talks about innovation, which I'll come to, but it would be wrong of me, as a Liberal Democrat seeking to represent the parliamentary constituency of Hazel Grove, which is in Greater Manchester, not to spend a moment just talking about the North and specifically talking about HS2 and the potential scrapping of HS2 and what that would do to the North. Vera rightly talked about the links between HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail, but what lots of people don't know is that it's HS2 and the tunnelling between the airport and the city centre in Manchester that unlocks Northern Powerhouse Rail, so the line between Liverpool and Leeds. So you don't get Northern Powerhouse Rail if you don't get HS2. What we don't want is the productivity gap between the north and the south to grow even further, and so HS2 should be built in full. So we want innovation, but what innovation should we be encouraging as Liberal Democrats? Well, let's look to what's worked elsewhere. Look at cities like Tallinn or Zlin, and look at the €49 ticketing across Germany to see what happens when either free or very low-cost one-off ticketing options are offered to passengers in cities across the world. We see numbers of passengers going up. At the moment, free ticketing in our country is offered to pensioners, it's offered to young people. This is talking about working age people. We see passenger numbers go up when ticketing options are easier. We see congestion down, improved air quality, reduced demand for parking, and we see a really positive impact on the local economy and bold action on climate change. It is a core Liberal Democrat belief that decisions should be taken as close as possible to the people they affect. Free or very low-cost public transport is a policy we should support to bring about the thriving towns and cities we need, take the bold action we need to tackle climate change. I'll be supporting the motion, I'll be supporting all three amendments, and I hope you do too, Conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Can I now please ask Victoria Collins to please stand by, and I call Andrew Haldane, who's speaking in favour of the drafting amendment.
Good morning, Conference. I'd like to thank FCC and Vera for accepting almost the whole of an amendment submitted by the North West region as a drafting amendment. There are a couple of points I would like to make. Clearly, it would have been a bit anomalous in areas where there are tramways if the new travel card was available on buses but not available on the trams in those locations. So I think that's a fairly obvious move. The other thing that we allude to is that the motion as originally drafted mentioned quite rightly the difficulty of new trams or other light rail schemes because of the infrastructure costs. And I'd like Conference to be aware that there are developments in train that could actually change that picture quite dramatically. In Coventry at the moment, there is a prototype available of ultralight rail. And unsurprisingly, the reason it's not moved yet to a trial scheme is that it's awaiting for the government to sign it off. If that scheme goes ahead and it works, the construction costs for light rail, where ultralight rail versions are appropriate, could fall dramatically, perhaps by as much as tenfold, if that is proven. So in future, there may be new opportunities for you to look at. In the United States, there are also running trials with hydrogen trams. Now, for those of you who might have an abandoned former branch line in your constituencies, this could change the economics of reopening that quite dramatically, because you could run cheaper to construct light rail systems over that route, but without the costs of full electrification. So it's a case of asking you to watch this space. I think the other thing I'd like to point out in relation to light rail is that the people who can identify where there's a potential scheme, it requires quite a lot of local knowledge to know where the transport flows lie, where there is possibly a route that you could creep one through without too much infrastructure disruption. So the people who've got the knowledge are people like you. Once you come up with that bright idea, you're stymied by the fact that your local authority won't have in-house expertise able to evaluate it properly. So at some point, whether in institutions like Transport for the North of England, or perhaps through Great British Rail, we're going to need a dedicated unit that can take potential bright ideas, see if they're really as bright as they seem, and if so, work them up to a properly costed scheme with a business plan that can be properly judged. So, conference, watch this space. Please support the motion as a whole, and please support the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can I please ask Ollie Glover to please stand by, and I now call Victoria Collins to speak in favour of the motion.
A few weeks ago, I spoke to a single mother in Harpenden who had sold her car to do what was right for the planet and save some money. But she told me that she had found life so much harder than she had expected. She couldn't get around easily. She often felt unsafe on her bike. And when she needed to re-find work, she couldn't get a new job because she didn't have a car. I've spoke to local food banks that have found there's an increasing number of people who've lost their leased vehicles because of the downturn in the economy, and again are finding it very hard to find new work because they don't have a car and the lack of public transport alternatives. Now, Harpenden is a town of over 40,000 people, only 15 miles from the nearest London tube, where there's a tube every few minutes. But the public transport in Harpenden is dire. So dire that the Harpenden Society recently commissioned a report into looking into the increased use of cars and lack of transport to see the problem and what could be done about it. They found that some areas of Harpenden had carbon emissions of up to 1,620 kilograms of carbon. That's almost twice the 962 kilogram average, making Harpenden one of the worst areas in England of pollution per capita from cars. Causes have included the relatively low cost of cars and transporting around in your car, but also the cut in public transport services. And indeed, a BBC survey has highlighted that in Hertfordshire, the biggest cut to bus miles services was between 2016 and 2022, which was over half, 56.5%. Now, the dire state of public transport is the same across Hertfordshire. From our train stations of Berkhamsted, Tring and Harpenden, a 30-minute return journey can cost you up to £30. And that's more than some of the flights from Luton Airport to the other side of Europe. In our village of Redbourne, buses stop at 7 p.m. That's if you can find one before that, and do not even think about getting a bus on a Sunday. In Wheatamsted, our Lifeline 366 bus has just been cut. So at a time when we need to be investing in transport, resources are being taken away. If we're going to improve these services, we need a national agenda to make that happen. And that's why I fully support this motion and the amendments. A good transport system is the backbone of our economy. It is the lifeline that people need to live independently, and it is at the forefront of tackling our climate crisis. We desperately need a transport system for the 21st century, so I wholly support this motion and hope everyone else does too. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Can I ask Councillor Pippa Halings to please stand by, and I call Ollie Glover.
Conference, I recently took a long journey by public transport. It was on a Sunday and involved one bus and 4 trains. There were 2 really tight 5-minute connections on that journey that were easily made, stress-free. The trains were long and comfortable and had lots of seats. The fare was good value, and one ticket covered all of the legs, both train and bus. I was able to print it at home and take it with me. It was a pleasure rather than a stressful chore. There's just one small problem. I wasn't in the UK, I was in Switzerland. A country which has got a 100% electrified rail network despite mountainous and difficult terrain, high punctuality, the biggest public transport use share in Europe, and a nationwide timetable designed around ease of connections between buses, intercity and local trains to create an attractive service offer. Conference, I'm ashamed at the contrast that the UK transport scene offers. The Conservatives speak of global Britain, but they can't even deliver an 85-mile electric railway between Oxford and Cambridge. Our transport system is plagued by a lack of integrated timetables within and between transport modes. Our fares are often outrageous and a complicated mess, and the punctuality and comfort is often poor. The government, rather than focusing on improving things, is focused on the cost of everything and the value of nothing, an imagined war on motorists, and playing the hokey-cokey with the various legs of HS2. Locally, walking and cycling are neglected as effective local solutions, with either poor or no infrastructure and poor urban space design. I'm therefore really excited to speak in favour of this motion and all three amendments, and that's for three key reasons. Firstly, the motion recognises the essential role that cars play in our society, but also that we have a tendency to overuse them, and we need to think about how we price them in the age of the electric car. Secondly, the motion proposes really credible improvements to the rail network and ones that I welcome as someone who spent my whole career working on the railway, focused on electrification for freight and passenger benefit, fares and regulatory reform, and integration of transport modes to create that customer focus. But most importantly, the motion articulates a positive vision for public transport as a solution not just to climate change and economic productivity, but in terms of enabling movement for everyone and that better accessibility that other speakers have articulated. It highlights our radical but realistic ambition in contrast with both Labour and the Greens. For all of those reasons, please vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ollie. Can I please ask Jack Bell to please stand by, and can I also ask Baroness Sal Brinton to go to the back? And I now call Councillor Pippa Heylings to speak in favour of Amendment 2.
Conference, I'm speaking in favour of Amendment 2 because the key point in Amendment 2 is this is a threat in terms of closing ticket offices, a threat to the Equality Act. 2/3 of disabled people, including those who are blind and visually impaired in our country, have problems using the railway network. And that is why ticket offices and the ticket office staff are so important to them. In South Cambridgeshire, we have 4 railway stations which are much used, and each of them has railway ticket offices which are much valued. That's in Ashwell and Morden, Meldreth, Shelford and Whittlesford. And I've been leading a campaign to save those ticket offices. I've had hundreds of people signing my petition, and I've had very emotive testimonials which I'd like to share some of them with you today. One is from the mother in Shelford whose son of 18 years old has autism, and his greatest joy is travelling on the railway and getting around. And the person who enables him to do that is Angela, the ticket office person who has been there for 20 years and last year received a national award for public service. And today, her job is at risk. Also, the gentleman who is severely visually impaired and says, I can't use ticket machines, and I can't go online to get my tickets. And my neighbour uses a wheelchair, and the angle of the ticket machines means that when the sun shines on them, there's a glare, and they cannot see them. The railway companies say there is only 13% of people now using ticket offices. Well, that's the 13% of people who are the elderly, the vulnerable, the disabled, the visually impaired, and those in a cost of living crisis that need to be able to find the cheapest ticket to get them to work, to school, and to the places that they need to get to visit family. This is against the Equality Act. 50
50 disability organisations, including RNIB, the Royal National Institute for the Blind, who is here in our exhibition stall and put a very emotive submission to the consultation. Go and talk to them. See how strongly they feel about this. This is about modernisation in a way that takes everyone with them, and I ask you to support Amendment 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pippa. Can I now ask Baroness Brinton to please stand by, and I call Jack Bell to speak in favour of the motion.
Conference. When I visited the European Parliament, I travelled from Frankfurt to Strasbourg first class for the same price as a standard ticket would cost from Edinburgh to Dundee. I even got a free croissant. Compare that to our overpriced train services today. When I travelled from Edinburgh to Sheffield, there wasn't even a trolley service between Edinburgh and Leeds. The train companies today are expecting us to find catering failures and accept them as the normal. We all know why that is. If they had their own way, every train, even the intercity trains, would be driver-only operations, which means that they deliberately do not employ enough staff. Compare that to how often you see on the departure boards, train cancelled due to shortage of train crew. Ever wondered why that is? All it takes is one driver to call in sick, and about every train that driver is supposed to operate is cancelled. They don't want to employ enough drivers, they don't want to employ enough staff because it will harm the record profits which they take in every year. When I was a child in the 90s and early 2000s, yes, there were train cancellations. Normally that was because they were late inbound or they broke down, as many of them did because they were old back then. But I don't recall them ever saying due to shortage of train crew. Yes, in the 90s, privatisation brought a lot of good things. It encouraged investment, which BR didn't want to do, or because the government wouldn't give them enough money. And we saw great progress, such as the upgrading of lines and rolling stock. That was because the government of the time picked the right franchise operator. Now, the Conservatives just go for the cheapest operator, which makes promises they can't keep, and tries to deliver a service at a low price, which is impossible because they won't employ enough staff because that'll cost them too much money. They try and operate our services, strip down, and make promises they cannot keep. That is why we should bring railways back into public ownership and make it a service, not a for-profit thing. Thank you, and I support this motion in full.
Thank you very much, Jack. Can I now ask Ian Jenkins to please stand by, and I call Sal Baroness Brinton to speak in favour of Amendment 1.
Conference, I'm really grateful that Catherine and the Lib Dem Disability Association laid the amendment about disabled people. Many of the other speakers have talked about the problems that people who are not disabled face. I have to tell you that #travelling while disabled is becoming harder. And I want to thank all of you who responded to the ticket office closures. This is already happening, and staff who leave are not being replaced. There's a real problem for those of us who rely on public transport to get to and from work, to and from family. Turn up and go, TUAG in the jargon for disabled people, is becoming a harder and harder thing to achieve. Even on my way here to Bournemouth, unfortunately the station I left from forgot to ring Bournemouth. Nobody there to greet me. However, there was a conductor on the train who knew I was on, and he refused to close up the train until someone arrived. Southern trains have already got rid of conductors, and many of the other companies want to do the same. Catherine mentioned brand new stations. Thanet Parkway on the High Speed 1 international line from St Pancras to Ashford and the Channel Tunnel not only is unstaffed, it does not have level access. So the routine, if you wish to go onto a train there, and I have to face this at many of the other unstaffed stations, is that you have to ring and arrange for a staff member to come from another station to put you on a train. Sometimes, as happened when I was at the by-election in Lewisham, they have to actually get on a train which may only come once every 20 minutes. So your 10-minute journey between stations is entirely dependent on other trains arriving quickly. You cannot rely on that to get to work on time. In Aviemore, when I spoke at the Lib Dem Scottish conference some years ago, I couldn't get on the main platform. I had to go all the way down, across a bridge and round. And unfortunately, nearly used up all the remaining battery in my wheelchair. Please, conference, if ever you are talking to ministers, as I do, and as Jenny and Vera do on a regular basis, talk about the plight of disabled people. Our rights are disappearing fast, and this government is engineering it and lying when they say that ticket office closures will help. They won't, it won't. This party will continue to stand up for human rights. Disabled human rights matter as much as anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sal. Can I now ask Rebecca Taylor to please stand by, and I call Ian Jenkins, who's speaking against lines 91 and 92.
Conference, good morning. I want to speak to you partly as the chair of Campaign for Rail, which is an organisation based in Birmingham which seeks to encourage growth of freight and passenger transport. And I make no apologies for talking about freight. I think we all know we need to get more goods on our railways off the roads. So I spoke to people at some of the influential people at the multimodal exhibition recently, including the Freight Transport Association and the Rail Freight Group. I know that the plan for the Oxford to Cambridge line was to be electrified from the word go. I know that. Be aware, however, that at the Oxford end there is no electrification for it to connect to. I agree it should be electrified in due course, but I think it has to take its place in the queue behind more important electrification schemes as identified by the rail industry. Currently, there are, in the 2-year plan, we have electrification for Wigan to Bolton, part of the Transpennine route, an extension of the Midland Main Line, which is dragging on and dragging on, a total of less than 100 miles, or about 100 miles actually. And only 38% of the UK rail network is electrified. We need to increase the rate of progress, but we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have electrification trains sufficiently. We don't have the staff to be able to go at this pace to go further and faster, and that needs to change. But I would take advice from the industry, which identified electrification black holes. From our ports, particularly Felixstowe and Southampton, those are the priorities to electrify to the West Midlands main line, West Coast main line, sorry. Electrifying Oxford to Cambridge would be welcome, but later. That's why I'm not keen on lines 91 and 92. If we impose the cost burden of electrification on new railway lines, e.g. the new Blythe Valley Railway line, or the Portishead branch, or the Scottish Borders line, it would have lessened the chances of them being reopened in the first place because of costs. Quickly on track access charges. Are you aware that Network Rail levies higher track access charges for electrified lines than diesel? It is £4.31 per kilogram train mile for a diesel train and £6.77 per kilogram train mile for an electric. And that is why companies like Freightliner are selling off electric locomotives to Bulgaria and running polluting diesels under the wires. It's economic and environmental madness. So I think it's better that we don't hidebound ourselves on lines 91 and 92. I asked that the committee have a look at that idea again. I didn't put an amendment in to cancel it, perhaps I should have done, but it's not a great idea.
Draw your remarks to a close, please.
Thank you very much. So I support the entire motion, but please bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Can I now please ask Councillor Sam Al-Hamdani to please stand by, and I call Rebecca Taylor to speak in favour of lines 96 to 99.
Good morning, conference. As a long-time commuter cyclist in London, I can attest to the importance of dedicated cycling lanes. Careful, experienced cyclists are killed every year in London. My current cycle commute is quiet back streets with very little traffic. But there are many people for whom that simply isn't possible. In the past, I cycled from Archway to Vauxhall, and one day a colleague came into the office traumatised, having seen a cyclist knocked off their bike on the route I took to work. The cyclist died. I know many people who would gladly cycle to work, but do not do so because there's no route they can take from their home to their place of work that would not have unsafe sections. Safe cycling infrastructure is really, really important. Since becoming a parent, I've become more risk-averse in my cycling. In my last job, I chose not to cycle to work because every possible route involved at least one section of road that I considered too risky. I would also like to remind conference of the important health benefits of physical activity. It improves overall physical and mental health, can help reduce the risk of non-communicable diseases, including cancer, and can contribute to preventing weight gain. It's not so strong, the evidence on weight loss, but it's very good on maintaining a healthy weight. Many of us don't meet national guidelines on physical activity, which is 150 minutes of moderate exercise a week or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise. Making it easier to walk and cycle is a good way of helping people get a bit more exercise, and it's far cheaper than joining a gym or going to exercise classes. For time-poor people, like working parents, myself included, it's easier to fit in a bit of cycling and walking than it is to do something else. In a cost of living crisis, being able to walk or cycle to work saves money. In the past, I used to save over £100 a month by cycling to work, so I wasn't paying tube fares. Save money, improve health, cut carbon emissions, because some of those people who are driving can take their bike. What more could Liberal Democrats want? Please support the motion and the amendments which improve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Can I ask Ian Stokesbury to please stand by, and I now call Sam Al-Hamdani to speak in favour of Amendment 3.
Thank you very much. Thank you, conference. It's very simple. This all just makes sense. Vote for it. Yay. Specifically, so I live in Saddleworth, in Oldham. I used to live in Marsden, which is just the next village over. It's a lovely little village. I recommend you go. We have a very good jazz festival. But it is outside Greater Manchester by one stop. I used to be able to buy a ticket for the whole of Greater Manchester for £110, and that was wonderful and brilliant. I wanted to go to Marsden. That cost for one stop £127 for the month, £17 more than all of Greater Manchester because it just didn't add up. And this is the kind of incoherence that our current system has. If you are in Greater Manchester, and things are changing with the franchising, which is very good, you mentioned we're getting it in Manchester and other people should, they're drawing together the tram lines into the system. But at the moment, if you want to get the tram, that's a whole separate pricing structure altogether. You don't get it free with the ticket that you are getting unless you happen to be in the town centre. It's just so incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. And in a town like Oldham, where we have one train station for 200 and something thousand people, like, why is that not part of the same thing? So we need this simplification of pricing, of ticketing, of having regional and national structures that just make it easy. At the moment, we're trying to make public transport better to improve the environment, and so much of this is stick. Getting our pricing structure right, making it easy to just buy a ticket that does everything, makes it all carrot. And it'd be nice to have some carrots when we're on public transport. We don't have any at the moment. Right, that's it. Vote for the motion, vote for all the amendments, do good things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Can I now please ask Baroness Jenny Randerson to stand by to summate on the motion, and I now call Councillor Ian Stotesbury.
Good morning, conference. My name is Ian Stotesbury and I have the pleasure to be the portfolio holder for transport in Watford with elected Mayor Peter Taylor. And we are working really, really hard to already deliver some of the things in this motion. And it's not a surprise, this makes sense. Liberal Democrats are the party of opportunity, the party of human rights, and the party of common sense. Show me anything in this motion that doesn't align with all three of these. And I think we're indebted to the movers of the amendments for highlighting just how important some of these issues are for human rights. I have a long speech, but lots of it's been covered, and I think we're indebted to all of our speakers to this conference. I think that the quality and calibre at conference has been truly incredible. So I'm just going to pivot to the end of what I was going to talk about, which is this should be treated as a blueprint. I'm not going to say go back and prepare for government, but I am going to say go back and prepare to campaign. I've listed a few particular lines that I think we should talk about, and it's rails, and it's bus, and it's active transport. Let's go back to our towns and our cities and our communities and talk about these things at every turn. It's important for health, as was just mentioned. It's important for opportunity and equality, as was just mentioned. And show me anyone in the country who won't support all of this. In Watford, we brought in Beryl bikes, and that's gone down incredibly well. We were the first place in the country to introduce an EV bike share scheme, and it has been a roaring success. 1 million kilometres have now been cycled on our bike scheme, which is 25 times round the earth, and that's despite a particularly poor set of infrastructure available to our users. Imagine what it would look like if there was the real meaningful investment in infrastructure in Watford. So please, conference, support all of the amendments, support the motion as a whole, but most importantly, let's not let this die as yet more perfect Liberal Democrat policy. Let's go campaign and win and shout. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Can I now call Baroness Jenny Randerson to summate on the motion?
Thank you, conference, for an excellent debate. And thanks to those who spoke to the amendments, all of which added to the impact of this motion, and we're happy to accept them all, of course. There have been powerful points made about disabilities and indeed about the link of ticket offices for access to those with disabilities. There have been important points made about devolution, and of course, we should have specified trams. Our transport policy is about sustainability and fairness. We want to move rapidly to net zero, and that'll help the planet as well as improving our health. Excellent public transport systems are key to reducing inequality. Inequality is about lack of access to social opportunities, education, jobs, social life, medical care. But be in no doubt, conference, public transport's in crisis. Small towns such as Sidmouth in Devon and Innsworth in Gloucestershire are public transport deserts. 3,000 bus routes have been withdrawn since 2009, and almost 60% of public transport journeys are made by bus. So investing in lots and lots and lots of zero carbon buses are the quickest and cheapest way to transform public transport. Do you know, in the 19th century, Britain invented the railways, but thanks to the dither, the constant political U-turns, the short-term political point scoring of the Tory government, thanks to all that, we now, in the 21st century, seem unable to build a high-speed rail line of the sort available throughout Europe. While vehicle fuel taxes are frozen, rail fares have risen steeply. Our rail system cries out for investment and modernisation, and indeed for cheaper fares. and for simple solutions like reform of the ridiculously complex structure that has been identified by a couple of speakers. What it doesn't need is the closure of ticket offices, used 168 million times last year. These problems have been ignored by the Tories. We have a Prime Minister, you know, who leads by example. Why bother with trains when you can hop on your helicopter? From the 1980s, bus deregulation, to the 90s, dismembering of the railways into dozens of separate companies, through to today's crises, Tory policies have provided a fatal mix of underinvestment, micromanagement, taxes and fare increases that favour the motorist over the public transport. Add to that Tory incompetence and their callous disregard for social inclusion. No more hokey-cokey with the Tories, as one speaker referred to it. Instead, our communities need ambitious green investment in integrated public transport using the latest forms of technology. We need to enable more people to use public transport. It's all here in the motion. Please vote for it. Please vote for the amendments. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I'm just going to say for those joining us online that voting is now open on all three amendments. As you may be aware, at this stage we're going to be going through each of them in turn in the hall, but can I just ask those who are watching online to open their voting tabs so they can vote on those three amendments. So we will now move to a series of votes. Can I see all those in favour of Amendment 1? Thank you very much. And those against Amendment 1? Thank you. Those in favour of Amendment 2? Thank you very much. And those against Amendment 2? And finally, those in favour of Amendment 3? And those against Amendment 3? Thank you very much. I'll just check on the online voting and we'll come back in a sec. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Conference. Those amendments are all clearly passed. We will now move to a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Again, those online, please open your voting tabs. That should be online now. So can I please see all those in favour of the motion as a whole? Thank you very much. And those against the motion? We'll just wait whilst the online votes trickle in. Thank you very much. That is clearly passed. I'd like to thank all speakers and apologise. There were a large number of cards that were put in. I'd like to apologise to everyone we weren't able to call. I'm very, very sorry. I'd also like to thank my aide, Shafak Mohammed, and I'll now hand over to Hannah Kitching, who'll be chairing the next debate on food and farming.
good morning, conference, and welcome to item F28, Food and Farming, which you will find on page 73 of the agenda. I am rather obviously Hannah Kitching rather than Chris Adams, which is a change from the standard printed agenda. There is one amendment, which you can find on page 6 of Conference Daily. Can I please remind all speakers to keep to time? I now ask Kevin Langford to stand by and call Tim Farron, MP for Westmoreland and Lonsdale, and our parliamentary spokesperson for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to propose the motion.
Morning all. It's marvellous to see you. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you for being here. Look, since we last had a physical autumn conference, quite a lot of unpredictable things have happened. We've had a Liberal Democrat Prime Minister. I mean, admittedly only for 49 days, but who saw that coming? Well, me, obviously, I've been planning it for a quarter of a century, but everybody else didn't see it coming. Other unpredictable things. Apparently, I've got 7 bins, which is marvellous, and the Tory government can get into all of them. And then the amazing and unpredictable spectacle of me cheering on a Manchester United player. It happened. It really happened. Marcus Rashford, one of those rare people, a privileged man who did not forget where he came from and used his privilege selflessly and for good. I am a huge admirer. But what a pitiful disgrace that it took a footballer to shame a Conservative government into feeding Britain's poorest kids. Today, nearly 10 million people in the UK live in food insecurity, 4 million of them children. Every single one of them precious, utterly precious. The UK, one of the richest countries in Europe, and yet our rate of food poverty is amongst the worst. I am proud of my country, but I am ashamed of the growing tide of food poverty. Real liberals know that no one is free if they are hungry. No one knows liberty if they're weighed down with fear and shame over whether they can afford to feed their own kids. In Westmoreland, I see our food banks run by good people, mostly by churches, and I see subtle, though, desperate changes. I see people in my communities who until recently donated to the food banks, now having to turn to use the food banks themselves. If that does not shame us, then we do not love our country, because we cannot love our country if you do not love our people. And Liberals have always seen this. That great Liberal landslide of 1906 was in no small part built on overturning Tory barriers to trade with our European partners, which drove up food prices and plunged families into desperate need. I wonder if that reminds you of anything today. After that great victory in 1906, Liberals introduced free school meals, the state pension, and unemployment insurance, so that no one would have to go hungry. This is the party of the welfare state, because this is the party that gets that no one can be both hungry and free. So we will extend free school meals to all children in primary education and to all secondary school children whose parents receive universal credit. We will get round the understandable pride barrier that stops many parents from registering by automatically enrolling children and funding schools properly to pay for it. Unlike Labour, we will commit to universal free school meals, and we are brave enough and we care enough to end the 2-child benefit limit, a limit that shames the poorest and undermines the principles of the welfare state. It is 80 years since the Beveridge report. This party remains utterly proud of it and determined to stand resolutely in its defence. Fellow Liberals, once again, it will be down to us to stand against the giant evil of hunger. And if we care about feeding Britain, then we should care deeply about the people who produce our food. And yet, we have a Conservative government who have betrayed British farmers. Liberal Democrats are the party that values farmers, listens to farmers, defends farmers. The Tories let down our farming and fishing communities, driving many of them to ruin. Now, I spoke at the Northern Farming Conference just a year or two ago. And after my speech, a chap in tweed at the back of the crowd stood up and asked me plaintively, "Tim, how can we stop the Tories taking us for granted?" I weighed up the audience for a moment and replied, well, you could try not voting for them. There was a terrifying silence for a second, and then the audience erupted in applause because Britain's farmers know they've been betrayed by the Tories. A Brexit deal which locks them out of their best markets, that robs them of a workforce, that whacks up costs, pushing them to the brink, a botched transition of the new farm payment scheme that has left farmers facing ruin or having to turn their backs on environmental schemes. Trade deals that throw farmers under the bus, undermining animal welfare and our environment. You see, leaving the Common Agricultural Policy was that vanishingly rare thing, a potential, actual, genuine, living Brexit benefit. Seriously. And yet, through incompetence, arrogance, and taking rural Britain for granted, they have fumbled it, damaging our environment, undermining our food security. No wonder our farmers are looking for a new home. Conference, let's be their home. Let's be the party that gets rural Britain, cares for rural Britain, serves rural Britain and stands by our farmers, the backbone of rural Britain. Now, Britain's farmers don't just feed us. They protect our natural environment, our water quality, our towns from flooding, our carbon sinks and our epic landscapes. Farmers are food producers and they are our stewards of our environment, so let's reward them so they can perform those two vital missions on our behalf. Tories will tell you there's a trade-off between food production and prosperity and the one hand and protecting our environment on the other. They are utterly and totally wrong. And if they listen to farmers, maybe they might discover that. But you cannot boost Britain's farmers and the environment they care for on the cheap. So we Liberal Democrats propose an immediate uplift in the farming budget of £1 billion to help facilitate the transition in a way that is fair for farmers and good for the environment. All of this would go into an environmental land management approach so that as the basic payment system goes, we don't do what the Tories are doing and plunge farmers into poverty, driving them out of business or forcing them down the path of over-intensification. At the moment, many small farms are opting out of environmental land management schemes, not because they don't want to be environmentally sustainable, but because of the costs and difficulties of joining the new system. Overhauling your business model is stressful, complex, and fraught with uncertainty. That's why we would ensure that training and guidance is properly provided to every farmer, one-to-one, on-farm, so that they can navigate the system and improve their land. No government that cares for its people or understands its responsibilities could have pushed Britain to a state of such chronic food insecurity. Yet today, we produce only 58% of the food we eat. It's contributed to catastrophic price rises over the last 4 years. That is why we'd introduce a proper visa and seasonal worker system to allow our farmers and fishers to get access to the workforce they need and stop the disgrace of Tories allowing food to rot in our fields, animals slaughtered and then just buried or burnt. We would reduce reliance on costly pesticides, chemicals and fertilisers which have driven the recent price rises by investing in British production and sustainable alternatives. And we would do something else that is sensible. We would take the unbelievably radical step of stopping shooting ourselves in the foot and start the process of rebuilding trade with Europe. We would sign a veterinary and phytosanitary agreement with the EU as soon as possible, rebuild trust and cooperation so that we can export and import with our closest neighbours freely. We would also stand by the world's poor. We will restore the overseas aid budget and restore the Department for International Development. Because hunger knows no boundaries. Hunger is an outrage wherever it occurs, and Liberals will not play culture war with the poorest people on the planet. Now I want to thank Stuart Roberts for his enormous work in chairing the group that put together this fantastic paper. It is something that we as a party should be proud of. It shows our focus and it shows this as a top priority for us. But people often say, it's a throwaway line, I bet many of us have used it, that it's 2023. It's not right that people go hungry. I know what they're getting at, but with all respect, what's the date got to do with anything? Why do we expect 2023 to be any better than 2022 or 1922, for that matter? There is no automatic procession of human progress that we can take for granted. Does history teach us nothing? No. If we want children to be properly fed in 2023, we cannot lazily rely on the inaccurate assumption of human progress. If we want children to be properly fed, then we must roll up our sleeves and deliberately choose to make it so. It's time to build a country where food banks are a thing of the past, where no child goes hungry, where no parent has to skip meals to protect their own children, where we have food security, where we stand against hunger across the world, where we value, and I mean really value, the people who work the land and produce our food. In this paper, Liberal Democrats stake out our position as the party of the countryside and the party of farmers, because we get it. We get that farming is tough, but we also get that it is an awesome enterprise. In what other job do you get to wake up in the morning, very, very early in the morning, and know that your mission today is to feed the country and to save the planet? Our job is to get behind Britain's farmers and back them to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Could conference please note that this debate is going to include a slot for interventions. As I have been oversubscribed with speakers' cards for this debate, I have put some of those speakers' cards into the intervention slot. I will let you know in good time when the interventions are about to begin. Could I now please ask Zoe Hollowood to stand by, and I call Kevin Langford to propose Amendment 1.
I always pray I'm not going to be the guy to speak after Tim Farron, but I'll do my best. These amendments shouldn't be controversial. The policy proposals are all taken from the policy papers that are being presented to the conference. The amendments bring into the motion some more of the material from these papers that's relevant to climate change. Why? 3 reasons. 1, climate change is coming, and this is going to affect our food and our farming. We don't know exactly how much or how quickly, but we know the potential is significant and that pretty catastrophic outcomes for farming in the UK and for the UK's food security are well within the range of what's likely. Neither the government nor the electorate are thinking enough about this. 2, land use and agriculture are reasonably big contributors to global warming. And there are also parts of the economy which the government has found relatively difficult to address from a climate change perspective. No question, reducing emissions from agriculture and land use isn't straightforward, but then neither is replacing gas boilers. And we'll need to tackle the harder parts of getting to net zero as well as those that are more straightforward. And 3, as Liberal Democrats, it's very important that we keep talking up what we're doing on climate change. Amid all our necessary tactical messages, we need to find some places for the issues like climate change which we can own for the long term as we keep working on building up a base of voters who are ours rather than being largely borrowed on a tactical basis. There are 4 proposed additions to the motion. We highlight the risks to our food security and our agriculture of global warming. We include in the motion the key commitments that our working groups propose in relation to increased tree cover and the protection and restoration of peatlands. We highlight the role of public procurement in supporting local and seasonally sourced food, and we include reference to the development of alternative proteins. This is a good motion. It already proposes many measures that address the challenges of global warming, but it does this without explicitly mentioning net zero or climate change. It will be a better motion with the amendments that we've proposed. Thank you.
I now call Zoe Hollowood from St Albans to speak, and can I please ask Sarah Dyke MP to stand by?
Good morning, conference. It's great to be able to speak to you today about this food and farming policy. This was a really brilliant working group to be involved in, with huge thanks to all the experts, the other people who were on the working group. So Joseph Wright, who does so much in the background and probably doesn't appreciate me calling out his name just now, and to our fantastic chair, Stuart Roberts. And I'm really proud of the policy we are bringing today. We have heard a lot this conference about tackling the growing economic inequality in this country, and quite rightly so. As income inequality increases in a society, trust decreases, and society can become increasingly polarised. I think we're all fed up of polarised and populist politics, and what we have here is a policy that will tackle some of the fundamental drivers of this. It will tackle some of that financial inequality. I think this policy also really demonstrates our Liberal values, showcasing the fact that as Liberals, we really care. In particular, we care about people and we care about our planet and the health of both. One specific part of the policy I'd like to talk about is our commitment to free school meals to all primary school children. And I speak as someone who personally benefited from free school meals at primary school. And Tim is right to call out the fact that there is stigma and barriers attached to claiming those free school meals, I know. And I think it's wonderful today that we're going to make it universal and therefore remove that stigma entirely. Now already many Lib Dem councils roll out free school meals, we know, often against Tory opposition to such initiatives. But we need to make this a national commitment. There should be no postcode lottery when it comes to ensuring our primary school children do not go hungry at school. School dinners tend to be a healthier, more nutritious option for school, and one study of over 600 children showed that children who ate school dinners had higher intakes of protein, fibre, most vitamins and minerals, and lower intakes of sugar compared with packed lunches. This same study showed that junk food intake at ages 10 to 11 was correlated with lower school attainment in their SATs. So it's important that our children have the best start in life in order that they can fulfil their potential. Providing free school meals for primary school children is an important step forward in meeting that goal. It's also particularly important right now during the cost of living crisis. This policy demonstrates that we care about families, children, and fairness in society. So, conference, I would strongly encourage everybody to vote for this policy. Thank you.
I now ask Adam Sturtridge to stand by, and can I now call Sarah Dyke, our new MP for Somerton and Frome, to speak.
Conference, I'm delighted to be addressing this debate, not only as the newly elected MP for Somerton and Frome, but also as a member of the farming community myself. My family have been farming in the West Country for generations. Right now, it's an extremely challenging time for farming. Like most farmers, I'm keen to enhance and protect our natural environment while producing the food for our plates. My family's farm is suffering from the lack of support this Conservative government has provided. The Conservatives have completely abandoned the farming community. They're cutting our payments when the new system isn't even funded properly. They're signing trade deals that undercuts the high standards we work towards. Now, I'm all for free trade, but it must also be fair trade. Earlier this year, in the middle of an energy crisis, the Conservatives decided to cut energy support for farmers, and they didn't even consider them to be energy intensive. Imagine a government deciding to slash support in a cost of living crisis to the people who produce our food. It beggars belief. But one of the biggest issues is the workforce. Farmers are seeing food rotting in the fields because there's no one to pick it. They're culling livestock because there's no one to slaughter it. And that's because of this government's failure to put in place a proper workforce plan. We're in desperate need of workers. We don't care where they come from, if that's the UK, Europe, or further afield, but we just need them. If we don't get them, then food prices will continue to soar and farmers will go out of business, making the problem even worse. That's why I'm delighted that this party earlier this year and through this motion today have recognised that. Alongside this, an extra £1 billion for the Environmental Land Management Scheme is vital if we are to support sustainable farming in the long term. But I'd like us to go even further. And of course, ensuring that trade is fair as well as free by ensuring that imported food doesn't undercut the standards we expect farmers in the UK, like my family, to work towards. One thing that was clear during my recent by-election campaign is that farmers, who are usually reliable Conservative voters, are abandoning that party. They don't believe they can trust the Conservatives any longer. They feel abandoned and politically homeless. But with this motion, the Liberal Democrats are showing that we are that home. I urge you, conference, back this motion and make the Liberal Democrats the natural home of farmers across the UK. Thank you.
Thank you. Can Duncan Brack please stand by? And I now call Adam Sturtridge from South East Cornwall to speak.
Good morning, conference. This is my first time speaking. Now, I can't echo any better what Tim Farron and Sarah Dyke have just said regarding supporting farmers. But I will say this. I was a dairy farmer. And I was a dairy farmer I was a sixth generation dairy farmer. I stopped farming in 1999. And part of the reason for doing that was because I didn't see the political will to keep farming in business. And ultimately, that's what it's about, keeping farmers in business. Interesting thing is that there's parallels. When I stopped, the Tories have been in government for 18 years. And I wonder if that applies today. I'm also now going to be, in 2021, I stood in for Cornwall Council, Cornwall Unitary Authority, in a rural area. And I have many farmers in my division. And I want to be able to tell to them that we are behind you. We want to support you. Farmers love nature. They want to improve the environment, but ultimately, they're a business. They have to make a living. And in order to do that, they need to have funding. And as others have already said, this is the government have botched the transition from a farm basic payment scheme to this wonderful ELMS scheme that should be available to all. Small farms find it difficult. When I was farming, I did manage to hire an advisor for a short while, but it's costly. Farmers need to have training to be able to move from one business model to another. And that's why I think that it's so vital that they get that advice through the ADAS. What I don't want to see is farmers go out of business. What I want to see is, and what I'm about to do, is to go to my farmers in 2025 when I'm standing for council, but say, the Liberal Democrats are behind you. And we don't want to see what happened to me where I had to leave farming. I want them to be able to produce food and look after our environment. Please support this motion.
Can Alex Brenton please stand by? I now call Duncan Brack from Lambeth to speak.
Thank you, Hannah. Conference, is pretty clear from the pre-manifesto debate yesterday that there's a good deal of unhappiness with the leadership's determination never to talk about our policy on Brexit. Many of us on the Federal Policy Committee were unhappy about it too. Some of us, a minority sadly, argued for an explicit reference in yesterday's motion to the UK applying to join the single market as the biggest single step to economic recovery. Now, our opponents on the FPC made the case that voters don't want to hear us talk about Brexit or the single market, rather than the cost of living or the NHS or economic recovery. But that was a stupid argument. No one has ever proposed that we should talk about single market membership instead of these other issues. The point is, it is part of the solution to these problems. And no part of the British economy better represents that than the food and farming sector, one of the hardest hit by Brexit. As Sarah said, because of restrictions on freedom of movement, UK farms have been left desperately short of seasonal workers. Fruit and vegetables have been left to rot in the fields. Farm animals are being culled and meat destroyed because of lack of staff in abattoirs. Fishing fleets have been left unable to function because of visa rules. Despite Brexit, the EU continues to be the largest market for UK food exports. Of course it does, they're our nearest neighbours. Now, obviously, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement does provide for zero tariffs and zero quotas on trading goods with the EU, but because the UK is outside the single market, it does not eliminate export documentation, border controls, and veterinary and phytosanitary inspections. Businesses exporting meat now have to complete a 21-step process to export their products to the EU. Previously, they faced just one. So no wonder UK meat and fish exports to the EU fell by almost half between the end of the transition period and March this year. And on top of that, we have the government's disastrous trade deals like the Australia Free Trade Agreement. Lower production costs and weaker standards in Australian cattle farms will undercut UK farmers, which means either they will have to drop their environmental and animal welfare standards or go under. Section 7 of this policy paper and lines 88 to 107 of the motion set out our proposals for repairing the damage that Brexit has done, culminating in applying to join the single market, though that's not mentioned in the motion, and I noticed that Tim didn't mention it either. But that will undo all of the negative impacts I've just listed, including requiring withdrawal from the Australia and New Zealand trade deals. Building a better relationship with Europe, including critically single market membership, is key to the survival of British fishing and farming and food exports. It is impossible to see how the sector can prosper without it. And we are the only party that can say that. Neither Conservatives nor Labour will. So this is how we frame the discussion about Brexit, not by only talking about Brexit and ignoring everything else, and not by ignoring Brexit and never talking about it, but by presenting it as the best solution to the threats that the food and farming sector faces. That is true, that is essential, and it's distinctive. That should be the Liberal Democrat message. Thank you.
Can I now ask Julia Aglianby to stand by? And I now call Alex Brenton from Mid-Dorset to speak. Alex, I believe, is a first-time speaker.
Good morning, conference. I wasn't going to speak because, although I talk a lot, I try not to do formal speeches. But I woke up in the middle of the night, having read the policy papers last evening twice, and suddenly thought, there's a flipping gap in this. Why haven't they put this in? Now, I support the motion generally, and I like most of the policy. So I'm not against, but it could be so much better. What I really support is the revitalisation of ADAS, which might mean that farmers then have access to better independent, forward-looking advice, because the advisors for the last 20 years have very largely been sponsored by big seed and fertiliser and chemical companies. So there's a bit like the doctor offering you the pills he was given, because he was given them. So I like it, but farming has an image problem. It is seen as a closed shop. If you don't come from a farming family, hard luck. You may have to have made your fortune in the city or on TV, and then you get the Clarkson's Farm sort of farce. People coming in with lots of money and no idea. How do you start? How do you get people into farming? How do you make it feel that it's a career for them? In Dorset, we still have a county farms estate, which actually started with, after the First World War, I think, the war between the wars, and one of its aims was to give an entrance to farming for people who otherwise wouldn't manage it, because the capital investment to start is huge. There's nothing in the policy about startups, about how to get people engaged in farming. And as it seems like from the outside, like a closed shop, you're not going to get in there, public sympathy is a little bit, farmers, they're always moaning. And they are, quite rightly usually, but we also haven't got an exit strategy for farmers. A lot of farmers go on, I mean, most of our farmers are now well over 50, and they give up sort of exhausted. But there should be a way of linking them with, say, a startup farmer so that they could work together for a few years and gradually transition. There's nothing in this policy about that. But my biggest beef, and this is because I'm me, I teach horticulture, this is about food and farming. Hang on. The best way to be healthy, we're told, is to have a healthy gut biome, you know, your insides.
Could you please begin to draw your remarks to a close?
Okay. If we want to have a healthy biome, we are supposed to eat 30 different sorts of plant material in a week. We've only got 4 major grains.
Could you please draw your remarks to a close now?
Get horticulture into.
Thank you very much, Alex. In a moment, I will be moving on to taking a series of interventions. Can the following people please make their way to the intervention mic, which is located over there? Tony Vickers, Andrew Hudson, Chris Naylor, Richard Benwell, Peter MacDonald, Peter Hurst, Will Sackwell. I now call Julia Aglianby from Cumberland to speak. Julia is also a first-time speaker.
Good morning, conference, and thank you to Stuart and his working group for a fantastic policy on food and farming. I am speaking today to particularly support the extra £1 billion per annum for the Environmental Land Management Scheme as part of our fair deal. On Friday, the Farmers' Guardian covered my resignation as a director of a small national charity to run for Parliament for Penrith and Solway, bringing the Tim Farron effect north over Shap. As a result, yesterday I received an email from a farmer in Dartmoor, some 500 miles away from my constituency. He had read the article and he said, I quote verbatim, "Just keep telling the farmers that the Tories have poked them in the eye, kicked them in the nuts and picked their pocket over the last 7 horrible years." We as the Lib Dems can give that message loud and clear. But we must also offer both hope and a credible, workable alternative policies. The situation for farmers is desperate, and that is bad for us all. My constituency has hundreds of hill farmers who this year, due to Tory incompetence, have suffered a 63% reduction in earnings. Yes, 63%, income down to £16,000 for a family. That is not enough to live on. And it is not just bad for hill farmers. Last week, I bumped into my neighbour, a dairy farmer, who told me the price of his milk had crashed from 57 pence a litre last year to 33 pence a litre this year. The break-even price is 42 pence per litre to produce milk. That means supermarkets are paying 25% less per pint than the cost of production. And we wonder why farmers haven't got the time to think about when and where to spread their slurry. The future of England's food supplies, our nature and our climate is in the hands of 84,000 businesses feeding 56 million people in England. The Tories have failed these businesses, and therefore they have failed all of us by failing to manage the transition from the Common Agricultural Policy to environmental land management. Currently, we spend a mere 0.3% of UK expenditure on farming and environment. This isn't much to pay for looking after 70% of England, securing sustainable food, enhancing biodiversity, access to nature, and tackling the climate crisis. In effect, creating a natural health service. I therefore commend this policy paper to conference. I commend the increase in the budget. To put it very simply, we will only address poo in our waterways when farmers have a fair deal. Thank you.
We are now going to go to the interventions. I will call each person in turn. Please note that you have a maximum of 60 seconds to speak, and after that time you will be automatically muted. Tony Vickers.
I speak to lines 85 to 87 and 117 to 118. In West Berkshire, a unitary district council, we have now more councillors than the Tories in rural wards. West Berkshire is 90% rural, 75% area of outstanding natural beauty, and slap across the middle of the district runs the A34 and M4 Junction 13, owned by the local agricultural society. Now here's an idea. Let's have an all-year-round farm supplies and produce distribution hub, cutting down the number of HGVs on our roads. We already have a rural business forum. We're talking to landowners and land managers. We're producing with them whole estate plans to help put their planning applications in context. So my question to the summator probably is, how can the Lib Dems in local authorities like ours maximise our influence with farmers to achieve more sustainable, affordable food production and cut down on food miles?
Andrew Hudson.
Thank you. This paper provides a lot for the farmer, but very little for the farm worker, apart from a bit in an add-on at the end called a better approach to the workforce. And there's brief mention of labour standards and trade deals and a bit about visas in the motion. That's about it. There's nothing about restoring the Agricultural Wages Board, which I regret to say our MPs voted to abolish, renouncing 2 International Labour Organisation conventions in the process. Some people not too far from me, over 100 years ago, might have found it useful. And there's nothing about strengthening the Gangmaster Licensing Authority or calling for a Workers' Protection Authority, which I'm glad to say we endorsed in a motion on slavery on Saturday.
Chris Naylor.
Good morning, thank you. Firstly, to say I hugely support this motion and think it's a fantastic bit of work and congratulate all involved. I'm from South Shropshire, a very rural constituency. We've just gained 100 square miles in our boundary review. I wanted to just add a little bit about farmers and their real importance to the local community. I think of all the farmers around me, Doug Williams up at Gorsty Bank, John Sankey over at Brow Farm, Jeremy Dale up at Bullocksmoor, and more, who all play a part in the community locally. They are very importantly economic players and employers. They're struggling with the current issues about costs and climate change, but they're also really, really important valued members of our local community. Thank you.
Richard Benwell.
Conference, in this horrible time of culture wars, wedge politics, there's a trap being laid, isn't there? The idea that you can't be pro-farmer and pro-environment. Well, I say if you care about net zero, you've got to be pro-farmer. If you care about rivers, you've got to be pro-farmer. If you care about air pollution, you've got to be pro-farmer. If you've got to care about biodiversity, you've got to be pro-farmer. But you've also got to be pro-farm change. And that's why I support the elements of this motion that say the Sustainable Land Standard needs to raise regulatory standards across the board and realise that we need to not just keep the money where we are now. We spend £11 billion a year on roads. Let's match that for farmers and more. This is a great start. Let's keep going.
Peter MacDonald. Peter Hurst.
Morning, Conference. Why is there nothing in this motion about locally producing your own food, about allotments and local food markets? In this modern age, trade is not to be taken for granted. Trade has a price, a carbon cost, and trade needs to be justified. So growing our own food and using allotments if we haven't a garden is so important to producing a more sustainable world. Thank you.
Can I please ask Helen Morgan to stand by? And now our last intervention, Will Sackwell.
Chair, conference, colleagues, what do bacteria and Jacob Rees-Mogg have in common? Well, amongst many other things, both want to take us back to what they see as the pre-Edwardian glory days. But while I have every confidence in our team in Bath and North East Somerset to tackle one of these threats, I do think we should all be very concerned by the prospect of returning to an age where people die of simple infections. The problem is a significant contributor to antimicrobial resistance is livestock farming, and in my research for this speech, I've come across several things that, quite frankly, terrify me. Antibiotics are given to animals not just to treat specific infections, but as growth promoters. Colistin, a drug of last resort in the NHS, is used commonly in UK farming, and some strains of E. coli have developed a genetic resistance to this drug. That's terrifying. Therefore, I'm glad regarding three things. Firstly, that we're addressing this problem in this motion. Two, that I have every faith in this party to respond to evidence-based practice. And three, that we have such brilliant representatives in rural life in Parliament to take this work forward. Conference, please help British farmers put food on our plates and protect our health. Please support this motion.
Can I now ask Stephen Hunter to stand by? I now call Helen Morgan, our MP for North Shropshire, to speak.
Well, good morning, Conference. As the person responsible for taking the Tim Farron effect to North Shropshire, I'm sure you'll understand that I'm also going to talk about dairy farmers, and it was really powerful to hear from an actual dairy farmer and from my wonderful colleague Sarah Dyke early on. I had a meeting with dairy farmers in my constituency quite recently, and I heard firsthand from them how hard it is at the moment for them to make a return. They're facing soaring energy costs, soaring borrowing costs, and, as we've just heard, an absolutely plummeting sales price. A recent NFU survey found that 23% of dairy farmers are currently unsure whether they'll continue production beyond 2025. Now, if you drink as much tea as I do, that's genuinely concerning. But joking apart, they're reporting being able to access finance for the new projects that would improve efficiency and enable them to move forward in the future. And it's no surprise, because of these constraints, that the average age of a farmer is well over 50. So we're at risk of losing what food security we have, and the Conservatives seem hell-bent on making this worse, cutting the basic farm payment, while the replacement they've put in place is frankly unfit for purpose. The New Elm scheme, for example, doesn't reward farmers for steps they've already taken to make their farms more sustainable. So it's actually incentivising them to rip out the measures they've already done to protect the environment and intensify. Using the subsidy system to encourage sustainable farming is absolutely bang on the right idea, but this scheme is inaccessible, ill thought through, and horrifyingly undersubscribed. It won't achieve its aims, and it's putting farmers out of business in the process. So that's why I'm encouraging you to back our motion today, because it not only increases the level of financial support, but provides the advice and training that farmers will need to access that support on farm and make their production more sustainable. But we also need to recognise that the land in Britain has lots of demands on it for energy infrastructure such as solar panels, energy crops, increased housing that we're going to talk about later, nature and wild spaces, and of course food. And we can't get away from the fact that there's sometimes a conflict between these demands. We need to consider the balance and provide some guidance. So I'm personally really pleased to see a land use strategy in these proposals, which will help with consistency both for farmers in investment and for planners to make those planning decisions. Now, I've also heard firsthand the sense of betrayal in our farming community following the disastrous overseas trade deals. The government have bargained away a level playing field with these deals in New Zealand, Australia, and easy for me to say, the CPTPP, that would allow food to be imported into the UK that would be illegal to produce here, and worse than that, much worse than that, sets a precedent for the future. The Conservatives voted not to give us, the Parliament, a right to scrutinise these deals. So in July, when the CPTPP was signed, allowing egg products to be imported here from battery hens, hardly anyone noticed. Battery hens have been illegal here for good reason since 2012, but now you won't know if they've been used in the products that are in your processed food. And that's why clear labelling is so important. At the moment, if something's been processed and packed in the UK, it's got a Union Jack on it and it is called British. But the animal or vegetable may well have come from further afield.
Please draw your remarks to a close.
And have been produced to a lower standard. We need to know what we're buying. It's really important. Please back this motion for a fair deal for our farmers.
Thank you. I now ask Talia Marrington to stand by, and I now call Stephen Hunter from Thirsk and Moulton to speak. I believe that Stephen is also a first-time speaker.
Good morning, conference. I was one of the members of the policy working group, which did a lot of hard work in a lot of areas. I'm not really going to comment about food poverty. I think Tim in particular has very well covered that. What I would draw attention to is the land management and marine management strategy. This paper as it stands does not say a lot about fisheries, and we need to, I think, as we take this forward, think more about the marine environment, our fishermen, and the stocks which are rapidly disappearing. So I do see this very much as a starting point, not a rounded policy that can be signed off as if we don't need to think about it anymore. We talk about farmers. What we should be talking about is landowners and land managers, some of whom are farmers, be it tenant farmers, some of whom are large corporate entities, sometimes we don't even know who they are, owning vast amounts of land. You deal with those groups differently and have to. So I think a good starting point, I support it, I ask you to support it when you vote, but we do need to take it further. And I would also urge you to come tomorrow to the Tackling the Nature Crisis debate, because these are intertwined. We cannot continue to downgrade our land in the way we have done, either for biodiversity reasons or actually for good farming reasons. Some of our farmland is almost now beyond farming. Thank you.
Can Matt McLaren please stand by? I now call Talia Marrington to speak.
Good morning, thank you. I live and represent parts in southwest Cornwall, rural, beautiful countryside, but a lot of coastline too. I represent Newlyn, one of the biggest ports, third I believe, landing catch worth some 32 million last year. Being able to live somewhere where I'm so close to nature, I'm grateful every day. It's an awesome and special part of the country. So I really welcome this motion, particularly the thread running through it of the mindfulness towards the environment, climate challenges and sustainability. Being outdoors, close to nature, when all your senses are tuned to the changes so acutely, the weather, lay of the land, passage of time, species, for example, habitat movement, for example, of crabs, it makes sense that all should be working symbiotically towards keeping our precious landscape healthy and productive for the long-term future. 51 different species of catch was landed at Newlyn last year, and this is a real indicator as well of climate change, however, and warming seas. It means we simply cannot just carry on using the seas and land as we've always done in the past, and should be mindful of being guardians and stewards and how important a role our farmers and fishers play in this. In terms of consumers too, there's increasing demand, for example, in traceable, sustainably caught fish. In Cornwall, small boats are best placed to do this in a way which will not damage stocks of vulnerable species. The quality, not the quantity of fish caught, often hand-lined as well, increases the value of the catch to the fisher, and an example again of how the threads are all intertwined. However, farming and fishing is business too. Farmers have been let down post-Brexit with the slow introduction of ELMs and underfunding. It's important about the increase to the budget as a clear commitment, and fishers too have faced the obvious challenges in exporting post-Brexit. I particularly welcome the land use comprehensive strategy too, and wonder about the sea here as well, in terms of competition from offshore wind and how to effectively manage competing demands. Newland still has big boats, but we have to be thinking about protecting our seas, kelp farms, potentially for carbon sequestration, and how we manage the two. We have such demands on our land and sea, and to be able to build a picture of how we can become more sustainable as a country through our domestic food production, but with energy too, solar, onshore wind, where we put our houses and how we create a flourishing environment and increase our biodiversity. I understand there will be difficulties, but it's not beyond the wit of man or woman to work out how we can do this. It's complex though, but the important thing is you cannot get change to more sustainable ways of farming without incentives, and more importantly, training and support in how to change between these different ways of working the land. I really support the further support for ADAS. Farmers and fishers have been let down by this government with profoundly unfair challenges being thrown at them, obviously leaving Europe and not part of this common agricultural policy. We have to keep to welfare standards, high welfare standards, and expect the same from our trade deals. This seems to be something the government seem at best lukewarm about and just not fussed about. And this is appalling, lets down British farmers and consumers. It's not a Brexit benefit, but a huge negative. And
Could you please draw your remarks to a close?
Doesn't want. It's simply not good enough to say this is about cheaper food for people in a cost of living crisis. We are really farmers and fishers.
Thank you, Talia. Can David Chadwick please stand by? I now call Matt McLaren from Enfield Borough to speak.
Good morning. Both what is in the motion today and the detailed policy paper which it endorses is excellent. There can be no doubt of the truly transformative effect it would have if and when these policies were implemented by a future Liberal Democrat-influenced government. However, I want to speak to you today about what is not in the policy, and that is the welfare of farmed animals. Now, to their credit, the authors of the paper do acknowledge this omission and have promised in a further motion, specifically on this issue, being put to the spring conference. But I couldn't, in all good conscience, let a discussion on food and farming pass by without seeking to interject on behalf of all those animals who pay the ultimate price to satiate our appetites. Now, I personally follow a vegan lifestyle, and thus am especially pleased to see the policy paper proposing a new research and innovation fund which would support the alternative protein industry, especially with respect to British-grown plant-based foods. And I'm grateful to the movers of Amendment 1 for further highlighting that as an issue in the final lines of their amendment. Obviously, however, most people are not vegans and do not share my moral outlook on the suffering and torture inflicted upon animals as part of farming practices. Nonetheless, as Liberal Democrats, I would surely hope that we can all agree that the illegal brutalities must stop. Those things which we as a society have already agreed are beyond the pale and which shouldn't ever be inflicted upon any feeling sentient being. Of course, you could perhaps be forgiven for thinking that the mere fact they were already illegal means that they have already been stamped out. Sadly, this is just not the case. In November last year, Animal Equality and the Animal Law Foundation published a truly groundbreaking report on the huge enforcement problem we have here in the UK. Based on information collected over a 4-year period, they disclosed that each year over 97% of farms are not subject to any kind of official inspection. Moreover, even following a complaint being made, only half of farms were then formally inspected. And ultimately, just 0.33%, that is 3 for every 1,000 complaints made, only 3 result in a prosecution. This is all despite the fact that over an 11-year period, Animal Equality UK have investigated 43 farms and slaughterhouses and found every single time that they have prolonged animal suffering, deliberate abuse or neglect, and/or definitive illegal practices. So if I leave you with just one thought, let it be this. We must act to properly enforce animal welfare standards enshrined in law. And to that end, I very much hope that the members of the Federal Policy Committee and voting members of this conference in due course strongly consider augmenting the policy proposals here before us today with a proper farm licensing scheme, one capable of funding the rigorous inspection regime.
Can you please draw your comments to a close?
That agriculture in general and animal husbandry in particular requires. Thank you very much.
Can I just remind people coming into the hall for the next item to do so quickly and quietly and safely, please? Can I ask Sally Burnell to stand by? I now call David Chadwick to speak.
Bore da conference. Rural Wales kept this party alive during its darkest days. When our party was nearly wiped off the map in 1945, Mid Wales gave it the kiss of life. And since then, our party has proved as hardy as any Black Mountain flock. So if Mid Wales is in our DNA, the fight for rural communities is a Liberal fight. Today, Welsh farmers are battling mountains of bureaucracy, rocketing energy bills, and often carrying heavy debts. They're pressured by supermarkets to sell at a lower cost than what it costs to produce. They're betrayed by trade deals that replace export opportunities for poor quality imports. So it's hardly a surprise that Welsh farmers are ready to turn their backs on the Conservatives. And yet, they are just as worried by what they're hearing from the Labour Party, who have shown no real interest in understanding Welsh farmers or the communities that they support, who have chosen an MP for Croydon to be their voice for food and rural affairs in Westminster, which is a crying shame, because we know that the horse of opportunity is running with us. People want to buy good local food. They're more interested than ever before in what's in their food, where it came from, and how it was made. We have to rebuild the connections between communities and producers. I live in Brecon, in the middle of a massive agricultural county that I know many of you are very familiar with, and yet it's almost impossible to find local milk because those supply chains have been completely destroyed. There's no sustainable future for British food without local producers, so let's send a strong message today that the Liberal Democrats support Welsh farmers. Thank you very much.
I now ask Stuart Roberts to stand by. I now call Sally Burnell from Waltham Forest to speak.
Thank you, Hannah. Yes, I'm a member in Waltham Forest, that is London E11, not really known for its farming community. I'm from an industrial town, I went to university in a northern city, and now I live in London. So why am I talking about farming? Because food and farming isn't just an issue for voters in our wards and seats in rural areas. As Liberal Democrats, whether we live in the concrete jungle or a chocolate box village or somewhere in between, as Liberal Democrats, we care deeply about all of the issues that this policy paper covers, and we've heard so much in these brilliant speeches before. That everybody has a right to access nutritious food, that the food we all eat is safe and sustainable, that the people and communities who produce that food are well paid and fairly treated, that the way our land is farmed protects and enhances the countryside and helps in the fight against climate change. We also care that the animals in our food system are reared and slaughtered humanely, and so I'm really pleased that the working group is going to be bringing forward more detailed proposals on animal health and welfare, including the thorny issue of non-stun slaughter, which affects millions of individual animals every year. But back to this paper. A national food strategy that will end food poverty and provide a fair deal for farmers is only possible if we invest in the people and systems to deliver it. When the supermarket shelves are bare and crops are rotting in the fields, when there aren't enough veterinary surgeons to care for herds and protect public health, we all know exactly who to blame: the Conservatives and their disastrous Brexit. We need this policy, and especially lines 88 to 97 in the motion, which Duncan talked about earlier. For decades, our food system has relied on European pickers, producers, veterinary surgeons, and of course, it's relied on free trade within the EU. So yes, we urgently need a veterinary and phytosanitary agreement. And yes, we must align our standards and quality of our products, already at risk of being undermined by the deal in Australia. But conference, yes, 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 we must rebuild trust and cooperation with Europe and get back into the single market and beyond. Food and farming means something to each and every one of us. What you had for breakfast, whether you had breakfast, where it came from, and how much it cost. Please vote for a national food strategy and support this motion. Thank you.
As we have had no one opposing the amendment, we do not have a summator for Amendment 1. So can I now call Stuart Roberts from St Albans to summate the motion?
Thank you, Hannah, and this is my first time on the main stage at the Liberal Democrat Conference. I am sure many of you don't know who the hell I am, but you will recognise my tractor. It is the one that drove through those bales of straw when we launched the local election campaign, and you'll be pleased to know it's doing well. Until February last year, I was the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union. I left that organisation to actively campaign for this party and help us win seats in rural communities across the country. I believe the policies in this paper will help us fight the Conservatives in every single rural seat. We will show how we can support farming, but also how we are the only party who have a proper vision where farmers do not have to make a binary choice between food production and the environment. There's lots in this paper, and I will highlight just a few points from my perspective. Some people claim that there is a trade-off between nature and food production. They say that if we move towards more environmental schemes, it will undermine the UK's food production or impoverish our farmers. I simply disagree. We can deliver both a progressive food and farming sector whilst also protecting and improving our environment. Now, every farm is different. We need to ensure every farm has an opportunity to use those schemes. Every farm will be properly funded as we support a move where farming addresses climate change and restoring our natural environment. Now, when it comes to food, you heard well from Tim on food poverty. It is a disgrace that millions of people, especially children, have to skip meals in 21st century Britain. Everyone in this country deserves to have access to wholesome, nutritious, and affordable food. It is our absolute duty. For too long, government has delegated its responsibility to feed people to multiple retailers and complex supply chains. We need to ensure those supply chains are fairer and function better. Now, good food and good nutrition is the foundation of the health service. It is also, as you heard earlier, the foundation of the education system. We all know there is incredible data, both positively and negatively, on what the impact is on people's ability to learn if they're hungry. We had a debate yesterday on the sugar tax, and I'd rather talk today about carrots rather than sticks. We all know that we need to eat more fruit and veg. We've got consumption of fruit and veg in this country wrong, but we've also got production wrong. Producing more fruit and veg in this country is a massive opportunity. We have the right soils, we have the right people, and it rains. Government have failed spectacularly for decades to not invest in an ambitious horticulture sector, whether that be technology, whether that be water infrastructure. And this has seen us export our consciences by importing ever more fruit and veg from parts of the planet that simply don't have water. We need to establish an ambitious plan for this exciting sector. And not only do we need to see a national food strategy, we need to see a very specific national horticulture strategy so Britain can grow more and consume more of these vital foods. Now, I highlighted earlier that I want to see us embrace a future where food production and the environment are not seen as polarised issues, but are seen as two sides of the same coin. A world where progressive, profitable, forward-looking farmers are producing great, nutritious food, completely in harmony with delivering on climate change, biodiversity, water and air quality. I would encourage you to support Kevin's amendment to this paper, and I will be. He is right to highlight the importance of the environment, and it is essential that our farming system works with, not against, nature. Now let's all use this paper to send a message to government and to all our constituents. You cannot take the countryside for granted anymore. There is an alternative to the Conservatives. And I say to farmers, fishers, rural and coastal communities, the Liberal Democrats are on your side, and we have a plan to deliver prosperity, jobs, security, and at the same time deliver positive outcomes for the environment. Conference, I urge you to support this paper and the amendment, and let us show all those involved in farming, those with an interest in food production, and those who are passionate about the environment, that there is only one way to vote at the next general election, and that is Liberal Democrat.
Thank you, Stuart. The online vote on Amendment 1 is already open, so we are now going to move in the hall to the vote on Amendment 1. Could all those in favour of Amendment 1 please raise their voting cards? Thank you. And could all those against Amendment 1 please raise their voting cards? I think that's pretty overwhelmingly passed, both in the hall and also online. So we are now going to move to the vote on the amended motion. We're just starting that online, so we will just take a moment to ensure that that catches up with us. We have, of course, still got people coming into the hall for the next item, which is a speech from Kira Rudick, likely to be very popular. If people could move in quickly and quietly, please, that would be wonderful. So we will now move to the hall vote. All those in favour of accepting the motion, please. Thank you very much. And all those against the motion? That is clearly passed in the hall. I will just take a moment to ensure that everyone voting online has had the opportunity to do so. And that has very clearly passed online as well. I would like to thank my aide, Nick DaCosta, and my hall aide, Jenny Rigg. I will now hand over to Layla Moran to chair the next session.
Good afternoon, conference. We're now moving to F29, the speech by Kira Rudick. I have to say, in Lib Dem bingo, I have always wanted to sit here in this chair. Thank you, Nick. And I'm here because I have the honour of introducing our next keynote speaker. None of us will forget, I am sure, nearly 18 months ago, waking up to the most dreadful scenes, images of war happening on our doorstep in Europe. The people of Ukraine have endured the most unimaginable hardships in the last year and a half, but they have also shown extraordinary bravery and strength. And that is absolutely true of our next speaker. Kira Rudick is at the forefront of liberalism in Ukraine. She is the leader of our sister party, Holos, who work to separate money from politics and promote liberal and democratic values. Kira herself is a constant in efforts to free her country. She's even joined the armed resistance, training twice a day, and has learned how to use a rifle. Speaking shortly after the Russian invasion, she told the BBC, "I don't have any plans to leave. This is my city, this is my country, and I plan to defend it as long as will be needed. There is no chance that some Russian crazy dictator would be able to push me away from where I live and where I love." The Liberal Democrats continue to be proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine. Conference, join me in please saying, Slava Ukraini. And please welcome to the stage the incredible Kira Rudick.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for such a warm welcome. It's a true pleasure and privilege to be here and to be speaking in front of you. I am Kira Rudick, member of Ukrainian Parliament and leader of the Voice Party, the first liberal party to ever enter Ukrainian Parliament. I would like to start with a list of thanks. First of all, to Ed Davey for his incredible warmth and the strong stance, that mix that you have probably had a chance to experience. I would like to thank Lila Moran for being always alongside us and for incredible energy that she's putting in supporting Ukraine. Thank you so much to Sal Brinton, who and her family has put a lot into truly supporting us and training Ukrainian soldiers. By the way, Sal and I, we are sitting at the board of ALDI, and we say that we are representing non-EU countries that have strong plans to become EU countries. Thank you so much to Nick da Costa for making sure that we arrive here and that we have been taken so amazing care of. And of course, to our amazing friends from Scotland, Alex Cole-Hamilton and Wendy Chamberlain, who made my visit earlier this year to Dundee such an impressive and a good thing to remember. So, you know, my stepdad is an American, and he has been teaching for nearly 50 years. And what I like to do with him is to have this intellectual debate about different things, how they are perceived in the United States and in Ukraine and in Europe. And so one of the particular things that is very crazy is that Americans believe that they won the Second World War. And, you know, and when he was telling the story to me, I was saying, Daddy, no, it is us in Europe who won the Second World War. And then we would go on and on and on for those lovely evenings that you have a chance to have with your dad. But the truth is, none of us have fought the Second World War. We are only being to be proud for something that our ancestors did, being on the right side of the history. So here I'm extending all the gratefulness to each and every of you who are dragging me in the halls and telling me the stories about Ukrainian families living with you, for the support that you are gathering, and for what your nation is doing for us. What you are doing is truly generational. And on behalf of Ukrainian people, I say only one thing: thank you. We will never forget it. Today is the day 579 since the full-scale invasion started, since my nation started fighting and continues doing so. There are some lessons that we learned over this time that I would like to share with you today. The first lesson is the lesson of unity. You know, when Kyiv was bombarded on the first day of full-scale invasion, it started at 5 a.m. We woke up and we started calling each other as parliamentary party leaders, because in Ukrainian constitution, it is written very clear on what we should do at the times like this. We, as a parliament, should gather inside the parliamentary chambers and vote for the martial law to begin. However, at that moment, nobody knew if we will be able to gather and how many people can we get inside the chambers. Our security was saying absolute no, red flag, no, 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 because if you would look at Ukrainian parliament, it is located at the center of a huge park. So if you are a Russian pilot, it is a no-brainer for you to fly over and bombard it. And so we decided that we will get as many people as possible. Kyiv was in collapse. People were trying to evacuate. There were explosions everywhere. And we said, like, okay, we will do what we can do the best, and then we will see. Finally, around 7 a.m., our security said that they will probably get us 10 minutes in the chambers. Take it or leave it. And so we started to gather. Ukrainian parliament building was built during Soviet time, and it's Soviet monumentalism. It was created to show you that no matter that you are an MP, you are still small and insignificant to the building of communism and socialism. And so imagine those buildings without the lights on, with all the windows covered with a bag of sand, and lots of military inside. We were getting very quickly inside the chambers, and when we looked around, we have seen that of 420 members of parliament, around 300 came. And for 10 minutes that we were desperately clicking our buttons, calling for the whole world to help us stand, to help us fight, showing Ukrainian people that we did not run, that we will be standing together, and we will be fighting, and we will be resisting. We were singing national anthem, and we were holding hands. It was one of the most emotional moments of my life, because at that moment we also made a vow between political parties in Ukraine that for as long as it takes, no matter how hard it would be, we will stand together. We will work as Team Ukraine until we win the war. And right now, 579 days later, I can tell you one thing. It is incredibly hard. Politicians are not set to work together, are not set to set their fights aside, unless there is something bigger than us. There is something that matters more to us. And I guess we found this thing. It's a freedom, and it is victory for our country. The second lesson is a lesson of values. You know, if you take a person on the streets of Ukraine and ask where we are in terms of European Union and Ukraine, they would probably tell you that we are already members, but the paperwork is kind of lost in the mail. And that's a good one, because it is written in Ukrainian constitution that we need to become members of European Union, members of NATO. That's the choice of Ukrainian people. And we as politicians have to make this choice real. So probably the first good thing that happens in the full-scale invasion was getting the candidacy to European Union for our country. And as you can imagine, it was not an easy project, with different work on the political arenas and pushing from different sides. And it was very personal for me, because I have so many friends, volunteers, who were getting to the front to fight. And when they were preparing, they were tying two flags to their backpacks, Ukrainian flag and flag of the European Union. And my biggest threat at the time, when we were pushing very hard to get this candidacy status, was, what if we won't get it? What we will be telling our people fighting at the front, that they are fighting under the wrong flag? But the work resulted in good news. And I remember the day, because I had a privilege to be in Brussels on the day when it was announced that we are becoming a candidate for membership in the European Union. So if you hear a story about a crazy woman running around European Parliament yelling, "Yay, Ukraine," it may or may not be me. The third lesson is that unpunished evil always returns. One would think that we have learned that from the Hollywood blockbusters, but apparently we did not. So I remember the first day of Bucha being liberated, and myself and the parliamentary delegation went there. We went there with the journalists to assure and to observe and to see what was going on there. It was one of the best and the worst decisions that I have made. The worst one is because I will never forget what I have seen there. And we have seen everything. The dead bodies alongside the road. We have seen mass graves and talked to people and women who suffered sexual violence. But the best decision, it was because I truly believe that at some point there will be a tribunal and Putin will be sitting at the bench. And at that moment, he would probably say that nothing of that happened. And then we will be able to say, no, we have seen that, we have experienced that. It was all for real, and now you are getting your justice. The fourth lesson is a lesson of peace. You know, there are so many of you who asked me beforehand, but how does this end? Is there going to be a peace deal? Is there going to be a negotiation? And my answer to that always is, but who or what in the world can ensure that Putin will keep his part of the bargain? We know he would not. So then we will have to fight until we win and until we find a solution of how to make sure that he would not attack us again. There is a reason for that. You know, I was born soon before Soviet Union collapsed. During my whole life, I was always under the influence of what was happening to my country. The poverty of the 90s, then the development of the 2000s, revolutions and revolutions, and then the war started in 2014, and then the full-scale invasion. I decided to become a politician because I had this crazy dream that at some point we can build a country where we will be able to grow children that would not be influenced by this country's fate, that would allow themselves to pursue their dreams freely as it is possible. And you know, right now, we are robbed of this dream because we have a generation of kids that have seen dead bodies, that know how to hide during the air raid sirens, that know how to study at the bomb shelters, that have to run their homes and to ask their parents the question that no parent can answer normally is, "Mommy, are we refugees now?" So there is one particular thing that we owe to those kids. They should not have to fight this war again. And there is fifth lesson, that impossible is nothing. You know, at the very first days, nobody believed that we will stand for more than 2 or 3 days or a week. Then nobody believed that we can get heavy weapons and use them wisely. Nobody believed up to the 3 days before we got the candidacy that we will become a candidate to European Union. Then nobody believed that we will take Kherson back and liberate a good part of Kharkiv region. Then nobody believed we will get the tank coalition. And my good friend Alex Coley-Hamilton remembers that just half of a year ago, nobody believed that we will get so needed fighter jets. And then the wide-range missiles. But you know what's the most important? That we believed that. And we were ready to fight for what we believed at. So now, when someone says that it is impossible to win the war, impossible to become, for Ukraine, a member of European Union and NATO, to rebuild our country, to become successful and prosperous, there is only one thing that I can say. Watch us. Thank you.